Good morning and welcome to AXA Coral Live. We're here broadcasting from the Kamabi Research Station on Curacao. Wonderful to have you with us. We've got schools from Nigeria, Portugal, the UK, Sweden, Switzerland, India, Cyprus, Thailand, Ukraine, Egypt and Greece this morning. And some special shout outs are going to the grammar school in Nicosia in Cyprus and the Avgulia Linar Datu private school in Greece. Welcome and great to have you with us. This morning our session is a live investigation and we are going to be looking at the impact of depth on two things. So we're looking at the impact of depth first of all on pressure, and then the second investigation, second part, is we are going to look at the impact of the depth of water on light. Now those two are very important factors and can affect the living things in various parts of the ocean. Fantastically, we have Dr. Pim Bongarts, who will be joining us for our expert interview, and that's straight after this live investigation and Ask Me Anything following that. And that's a sponge special, the Ask Me Anything sponge special. Hopefully we'll have some live shots from sponges just in the waters beyond the jetties here, and fingers crossed you'll see something pretty special. That is then all repeated later today, this afternoon, for our schools in the Americas. But before we start with our live investigation, I'm just being bitten to pieces gently here by little bugs and everything else. Before we start, I just want to introduce you to the sort of coral reef and the coral environment where we are. So we are at a research station in Curacao, and there's some bug spray winging its way to me, which is fantastic. Thank you very much, Ellie. Ellie wonderfully making everything work behind the camera. There we go. This will just make me less distracted talking to you. So the reason why we're doing Coral Live is because the coral ecosystem and the coral reef is so wonderfully beautiful, but also amazing. Now, coral is an animal related to a jellyfish and to a sea anemone, small polyp, and they create these amazing structures. So they're taking limestone from the water and creating these amazing structures that make up the reef. Now, we're here in Curacao because coral reefs, these tropical coral reefs, appearing in places like the Caribbean. So we have corals growing just out here on the piles on the jetty. We'll see some brain corals there. And then further out, you can't quite tell, but where the water slightly changes to a darker shade, that's where the main reef is. There's a drop off there, and that's where the main reef here is. Now, coral reefs, you can probably see, this is something we shot yesterday. You can probably see the brain coral on the pile. A few of my favourites, the Christmas tree worms, and a rather feather duster worm. That's a very sort of like the worm that looks like a feather duster, and those are its feeding sort of feelers out there, getting particles from the water. And can we see a little octopus? No, we can't. Not yet. This is the scuba footage from the reef. So we've got some scuba footage. Just being told what footage we're showing, and that's from just around the corner here. And so that's just a beautiful section of reef here, and you can see the variety of coral, the sponges that start to make up the ecosystem. And I don't know what fish we'll see. Probably sort of the usual sort of wrasses and sergeant majors and grunts, and those smaller fish there. Now, although it only covers sort of less than 2% of the ocean, less than I think 1% of the total surface of the planet, it supports 25% of all marine life. And so these wonderful corals, these are the skeletons, create habitats for 25% of all marine life. And we're here in Curacao to bring some of that live to you. Now, the second thing that's super important is that a lot of you will be sitting in science classrooms or primary school classrooms around the world, and you'll be learning science mainly from your wonderful teachers and from books and videos. But to find out where science happens in practice, we're working at a research station, and a field research station. And what that means is that from universities, from where professional scientists are, they come to somewhere like the Kamabi to study the reef. And what we have behind us is a sort of rooms where we can sleep, there's kitchens where we can cook, there's lab spaces where we can do our experiments, and all those different types of things. And behind us just here is the dive shop, as it were, where all the scientists can get their air tanks to go diving on the reef, take out a little boat here and go off and do their research. And one of the wonderful things about Coral Live is being able to have those scientists come and talk to us throughout our stay here. And we've got some of those sessions coming up today and again on Thursday. So let's start with our live investigation. So we're looking at two. We're looking at pressure and depth and light and depth. And I'm just going to put my phone back in the little basin here to keep it safe. But the first one we're going to do is pressure and depth. And so hopefully what you'll have, so just try not to slip on the rocks down here. Don't get nipped by a crab. I would like you to have a bottle. I would like you to have some tape and something to make holes in the bottle. If younger students, perhaps making the holes, the teacher make the holes, would be better. So, first of all, what we need to do is we're going to make 3 holes in a line, vertical line, along the side here. I'm going to put one bit further up. So I've got 3 holes, one here, and one at the top here. And before I put any water or anything in, I'm going to get a nice bit of tape and tape these up. So you can't go anywhere on an expedition without duct tape and cable ties. But we're just going to use the duct tape for this morning. Okay. So we've got those 3 holes taped up here. And then what we're going to do is we are going to fill the bottle with water. If you're not standing in the sea, you might need to use a tap, but if you are standing in the sea, you can just bend down and try not to get my microphone underwater. Ellie would be very upset. And fill the bottle up with water. Avoid crabs and various other beasties. There we go. Oh, and quickly put the top on. And so what we're going to try and guess is, off these 3 holes, how's the water going to behave with the depth? So is the water going to come out at the same rate from all the holes, or is it going to behave slightly differently as the depth in our ocean increases? And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take off the top. Oh, take. I don't know whether we can see there, Ellie. What's happened? Just slow this down. So what we can see here quite clearly is that this stream of water is behaving differently from this stream of water. I'm just wondering what our students think in terms of whether they think the pressure is greater as we go down. So I'll just fill that up again and we can have another look. So what we're looking at is how does pressure, what can we observe, and how does pressure change with depth? Where are we? There we go. So what can we observe going down here? What can we observe from the jets of water about the relationship between pressure and depth? And see how we're getting on and what observations we have coming over the live chat. Which of course you can't use with wet fingers. Here we go. Now, pressure is really important also for exploring the ocean, not just for the animals that live here. So, as you can see here, not terribly deep. By this jetty, only a couple of meters deep, the ocean. The next jetty, you've got probably 4 or 5 meters. And then further out, you've got the drop off down to probably about 70 meters. Now, what we have here, oh, we've still got a bit of water coming out, but we can see that at the bottom, and I'll just get a little bit more, just get the 2 bottom ones coming, is that we've got that jet coming further out. So what we can see here, further down, this pressure, this weight of the water is increasing. Now, if we were at the surface, the atmospheric pressure is 1 bar. If we go down just 10 meters, that becomes 2 bars. So double the pressure just 10 meters down. And the pressure increases by 1 bar, by 1 atmosphere of pressure for every 10 meters we go down. Now, that's quite a lot if you consider just normal scuba diving, maybe going down to 30 meters. But just think if we want to explore deeper into the ocean. Now, deeper into the ocean could be going all the way down to the deepest point, and that's 10,000, I think 944 meters down, or 94, you'll have to, I haven't quite rolled off the tip of my tongue, and that's the Challenger Deep in the Marianas Trench. And that, amazingly, is 1,100 bars, 11 times the pressure that we have at the surface. Now, just thinking about that, it would be the equivalent of taking the, let's say, the Eiffel Tower, turning it upside down and placing it on your big toe. Now, you have to have really specialist equipment to get down there. And that's partially one of the reasons why we don't know so much about the ocean, is because the issue of pressure makes it harder for us to explore. So what we've done this morning is we've looked at, if I make my mini ocean here, and I see how the water jets behave at different depths, I can see that the more pressure coming out faster, getting further, that pressure increases as I go down. So how do we get on? Fantastic. So hopefully you're all very busy with that. What I'm going to let you do as teachers is just tidy that away. And I want you to get set up for the main live investigation today. And that's really relating to coral. So this was more generally about the ocean. Our depth and light is going to relate to coral more. I'm just going to put that water away. We're not going to mix up okay, great to have that. Fantastic. So, setting up our next one, I want to think about how light behaves. I'm going to set up my mini ocean here. These are VHS cassette boxes, which I'm using in the place of books. Most of the students watching will not know what a VHS ever is or was, but that's okay. Teachers, that's another lesson to look at the speed of technology change. And nearly what I'll do is I'll set this up so it's safest for my phone and for everything else, and then I'll hold up the phone to show the measurements. And then I need my ocean. So what we're looking at here is basically a box suspended, kept up off the ground, and then we're going to use the phone as a light meter and place that underneath. Now you can see my ocean's quite small. And so what I'm going to do, just to demonstrate this a bit better, I'm just going to make it a little bit more like the ocean. I'm going to add a little bit of blue food colouring. There we go. Tiny bit there. Ooh, careful not to get that in the sea. So what I want to think about is how light behaves in the ocean. So I'm going to use my phone here. I'm going to use a light meter on my phone it's been raining this morning as well, so we're very damp and a little bit tricky. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a light meter on my phone. I'm holding that up. Ellie, can we see that I've got a light meter there? And it's using an app called Science Journal. And I'm just using that light meter there to measure it. So what have I got at the moment? I'm just turning it around. I've got about 450 lux. So that's the unit we're measuring in. I'm going to put that light meter underneath my ocean. And I've got a fairly steady stream there of about 2,000 lux. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start adding in water, and we're going to see how that changes. So if you're following along, at the moment we have 2,000 lux as our starting point. Can I rotate this round? Yes, but then I don't want to drop the phone, if that's okay. I'm going to keep it like this. Yes, the experimental setup, more for phone safety than for camera angles, I'm afraid, this morning. So I'm going to add in from 2,000, and let's see how this changes. I'm going to add in, where's my measurements? 200 millilitres. Oh, and that's 100, and a little bit more, down to 800. Now I've gone there from 2,000 lux, if you're noting this down, to 655. So I'm just going to start to add another 200 mils in. I'm going to see how this behaves, down from 660. A little bit more. So we started at 2,000, and then after I put 200 mils in, I started recording. And started recording, it went down to 660, and I'm just going to show you this recording that goes from after that second lot down there. So we can see on the screen it's gone down from 664 and then down here to about 400. That's just me, that wobble in the middle is me just moving my hand in front of the light and then back again. So we can already see I've got some nice measurements here that's showing That's the relationship between the more water I put in, the less light there is. We'll carry on. Put this back under here. So I've got about 400. I'm going to add in another 200 mils. And I'm now down from 660 to 210. And I'm now going to add in another 200. And I'm down from 200 to 119. And if I put the last bits in, I'm now down all the way to, oh, this is doing something automatically, to 78. So I'm just going to stop that and see what we can see here. So you can see quite clearly, each time I add more water in, we've got this drop, steadies out, drop again, and then steadies out. Now I've been doing that incrementally, so I've been adding sort of wadges of water in, a technical term for 200 millilitres. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pour my ocean back into my beaker, and I'm just going to do one long steady pour, and we'll see whether we get a nice relationship between light and depth. So I'm going to leave that here. Pour my ocean back into my beaker. Put the phone sensor here. I'm going to start recording. We're at 2000 again. And start recording. I'll try and pour at a steady rate. There we go. So hopefully following along, I can't see your chat at the moment because I've got the experiment screen on. I'll just stop that, pull this out very carefully. And here we can see quite clearly, starting here, just above 2000, and now I add in and finishing off that very clear relationship between light and depth. So what I want to think about now is why that might be important for corals. And Ellie, what I would love to do is to get back to the video on the piles here of the coral, and what I'm just going to do is explain why light's important. This is the coral skeleton. It looks white. It is white. When it's alive, and we're just going to see it underwater, it looks more like a plant colour, and that plant colour comes from the animal that lives on the surface in a membrane. The coral polyp has plant-like algae inside it, and that plant-like algae creates sugars using photosynthesis, and those sugars help to feed the coral polyp. So we can see now that we can see the colour is different, no longer white, but those plant-like colours. Now, we know from our science, looking around the natural world, the greens, browns, reds of the leaves of plants, and those plants need light. So if coral is going to get energy, it needs light. So how does coral adapt to being deeper? So what we can see, if it's deeper on the reef, we don't get as much light. So if there's less light, how does a coral cope? Well, certainly we don't really find photosynthesizing corals deeper than maybe sort of 80, 120 meters down. And we'll hear more about deep coral from Pim in just about an hour's time. But for now, let's think about some of those adaptations that might happen. Will there need to be a different color of pigment? Will there need to be denser collections of the algae to get the energy? So we've got some questions coming for you, and those are two things I just want you to think about. So we've got a question coming in on how far you can see underwater. And I was just thinking that this is a really good question for which I could do with a bit of sand, and I'm trying to see the nearest bit of sand to me. Can we, if we just cut to a lovely view, I'll wander off and get some sand, but hopefully we'll still pick me up on the sound. So what we're going to look at is this question is how far can you see underwater? And what I want to talk about is really that relationship between seeing underwater and also what's in the water. Now, the tropics are great for lots of reasons. The tropics are great because you can see quite far, and that's because there's not very much in the water. It's quite nutrient poor. I'm just going to collect some sand off the beach here, and we can come back and we can talk about being able to see underwater and what influences that. So just coming back with my sand from the beach. Very useful to have a beach next door to the live broadcast, just to talk about these things. So, and we're back. So what we can see here is some nice clear tropical water. There's not much in it. If I were to add just a little bit of sand or silt that might come from a river mouth, we can see that my visibility would start to decrease. Now that would also go for algae or nutrients or anything else. So how far you can see underwater really shifts and depends on where we are in the world. So that's one of the reasons why we don't get corals in areas near river mouths, and also how they can be really harmed by silt from farming and runoff from the slopes around the coast, and decreasing the levels of light getting into the reef. But on the reef you can see sometimes 10, 30, 40 meters, but other places, and if you go scuba diving off the coast of Scotland for instance, you may not be able to see very, very far at all. So where are we? So how deep can a coral reef survive? Now it really depends for the reef on how deep it can survive, is whether it needs that extra energy boost from the algae living in its tissue. So we have photosynthesizing corals, and they're shallower, down to about 80, 120 meters, and we have non-photosynthesizing corals down to about 3,000 meters. So it really depends on what type of coral it is. Great. From Konstantinos, a question coming through: how long do corals live? Great question. So coral colonies, I mean, we know some of those are several hundred years old, and really a very long-living corals. Some maybe up to 1,000 plus years old. So living for a very, very long time, creating these amazing structures. This, I think we were talking a few days ago. This probably taking about 6 or 7 years to grow. Nikolaus is asking if there are corals that, due to symbiosis with algae, are directly dependent on sunlight and photosynthesis. Very much so, Nikolaus. That's a great question. So the energy from photosynthesis, from the sugars from the algae, accounts for between about 70 and 90% of the energy that the coral polyp is receiving, the coral's receiving. Now, of course, that polyps also have fat reserves, and they also feed using their tentacles to get like plankton, small animals from the water. But the bulk of the tropical coral that make up the reefs here, and in the Great Barrier Reef and in the Coral Triangle, come from, bulk of that energy comes from the algae. Great, next question. How deep can the divers go safely there? It really depends on the equipment you're using. Mostly standard dive gear going down to 40 meters, and then using rebreathers to go, and other oxygen mixes, oxygen, nitrox, those kind of different gas mixes to go even deeper. I think the record scuba dive depth is just over 300 meters. Which is quite extraordinary. But really you're looking for normal diving down to about 40 meters, and then using additional techniques and equipment down to about 150. Christina, did you or one of your colleagues ever get decompression issues? And was it a dangerous situation? Certainly I've never had that. Ellie has had decompression issues. How was that for you? Not good. Not good, shaking her head. Don't recommend them. How Ellie, how did that come about? Was that over ambition, or do you not want to share that?
A bit too much diving in one day.
Too much diving in one day, and decompression came up, and you felt
Really woozy,
dizzy.
into a decompression chamber for 3 days.
And you had to go into a decompression chamber for 3 days just to. So how long did you spend on the water? At what depths? Okay, so down to the limits of sort of normal scuba at 35, 40.
But I was doing about an hour and a half.
For how many times?
5.
You did 5 dives in a day for an hour and a half at depths of 40, and then you wondered why everything went slightly wrong. Okay, there's a lesson for all of you out there of what not to do. Thank you. Alexander, what is the deepest point of the ocean that you have ever reached, and how long can you stay underwater? That really depends. So if you're in a submersible, the type that was used on the XL Catlin Deep Ocean Survey off Bermuda last year, and the next missions are continuing into next year, spending a long time in the submersibles, really great for science, down to depths of, I think that was 1,000 feet. But obviously there are scientific submersibles going deeper than that. And so that's really the technology, how technology is opening up the sort of the marine world to be studied, is using these different types of tools. Nick, if you want to bring with you live specimens from great depths, do you have to take extra precautions to balance the changes in pressure? Very much so, and really have to be really super careful, and almost doing the whole decompression work for your specimens so they don't die on the way up. Really interestingly, I find are some new techniques where maybe you don't have to bring up live specimens of everything you see. Using 3D scanners, you could scan something underwater, beam that up to the surface, and a 3D printer could print it out for you by the time you got back, and then using either environmental DNA or swabs, just like a sort of cotton bud type thing, getting some DNA and taking that back to the surface with you, and really just taking the information that you need without having to take a live specimen. Just checking technology and rain and those kind of things. Great question coming up here is, does the shape of coral change the deeper you go? Well, there's lots of different types of coral, but certainly, I mean, I think what you can see some branching corals like Lophelia down deeper, which doesn't photosynthesize, whip corals deeper, which would not photosynthesizing, which are soft coral. But really, I think what I've noticed is really the sort of plate corals almost was really much darker down there. So you can really see that sort of that difference in the sort of like the color of corals, and these very dark plate-like corals, which almost look like solar panels, trying to get as much sunlight as possible, solar energy as possible. I mean, just to think that just after 10 meters in the ocean, you've got 50% of the light, just after 10 meters. Lisa, what influences the growth of corals? Lots of things influence the growth of corals. If you just think about how many different factors influence the growth of plants. So certainly we have things like but corals are a little bit fussy. So for corals to grow well, they need a few things. They need very nice, clear, unpolluted water. Too much pollution, fertilizer, sewage can cause there to be an algal overload, so algae out-competing them on the reef. They like depths between about 1 meter and about 30-40 meters for the shallow reef. They like to be in nice tropical sunlight to get that constant sunlight coming through the water. They like temperatures between about 23 to 28, 29, maybe 30 degrees Celsius. They like quite salty water. So higher than the ocean average, or just up towards the ocean, above the ocean average of 35 grams per litre. What else do they like? That's about it. So no overfishing, please, because the ecosystem depends on there being a balance and different species of fish helping to perform different roles on the reef. So they're quite fussy, but all those things will influence the health of the reef. In terms of what it needs to grow, of course it needs dissolved calcium carbonate in the water to grow its structure, as we can see here. And it will need a little bit of food, so copepods and such like going past, and the current can't be too fast for that to catch with its tentacles, and it needs the sunlight for the algae inside it to give it extra sugars to grow its structure as well. Helena, what do I have to do in order to become a coral explorer and dive in the reef? Really great question. We've got a variety of scientists here who can share with you how they've ended up being a researcher on the reef, a scientist on the reef. But for now, here's some top tips. You don't have to do marine biology or coral studies straight on. If you're at school, you can go straight into a natural science degree. So you can just study broadly sciences and you can start to specialize after that. You will also need to learn how to dive and then develop your diving skills over time. But it's the passion. It is, I think that's what comes through from everyone we speak to. They are hugely passionate about what they do. It is tough, it is demanding. So unless you have that passion driving you through, you probably won't succeed. An academic career, going from undergraduate to master's to doctorate to postdoctoral research, that's a long and quite tough series of steps to go through. So we'll hear from Pim, who I can see just having breakfast, and he'll be coming to speak to us in about 45 minutes, and we'll share some of his insights as well. What kind of research do you do in Curacao? A variety of different types of research. Big specialism here at Kamabi in terms of coral reproduction and coral restoration, looking at how we can support the reef in regrowing, looking at the conditions that baby polyps like. So there's a lot of catching baby polyps and helping them out and seeing how to support them grow on the reef. We've also got some deeper reef experts, we've got some sponge experts, and others. Are there corals that are lethal for humans? I'm not sure whether they're lethal, but certainly sort of fire corals and some corals, other corals, they have, all corals have special harpoon stinging cells to capture prey, like jellyfish and like anemones, and some of them are very, very painful. We've only got 1 minute left and we've got so many questions. I'm going to try and whip through there. Are there edible corals? Only if you make them out of bananas and biscuits. See the incredible edible polyp video. What is the smallest coral you can get? That's a very good question. Down to about the sort of pinhead size. Kite class would like to know, how long can coral live for? Hundreds and thousands of years. How many different types of coral are there? Tropical hard corals, like we're talking about at the moment, about 1,300 species, but only about 70 here in the Caribbean and Curacao. Is there a creature that can only live on coral and nowhere else? We don't know about nowhere else, but certainly coral reefs support 25% of all marine life, so it's not a rare thing to be dependent on this amazing ecosystem. So how do corals keep safe from predators? Really good question. Hard, sharp structure, and also quite difficult to eat, quite difficult to munch. During the day, normally they're sort of, at night they've got their tentacles out feeding, and then during the day those are brought in to stop them being nibbled. So that's quite an interesting little thing that it does. And how much pollution is there in the water there? Great question. And too much is what we're hearing and learning, and for probably a lot of countries, small island nations are struggling with how do we deal with sewage going into what is the best way of water treatment, how do we do that better to stop those growing populations near the coast, to stop that sort of harming the coral. So actually this is beautiful, clear tropical waters. So compared to a lot of places around the world, it's wonderful when we go swimming and go and talk to but enjoy the eagle race going past here, enjoy the wonderful life in the ocean here. But I think one of the things that to improve is how do we deal with sewage, and sponge might be the answer. And we'll find out more about that in our sponge special, Ask Me Anything, which is happening later this morning. Thank you so much for being part of this live investigation, for being part of learning more about the impact of depth on light and on pressure. It's been wonderful having you with us. For now, it's goodbye from the Kamabi Research Station. Tune back in 45 minutes for an expert interview with Dr.